Bismi Rabbika, and this is the second element. Iqra. Why do we read? We read in order to come to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The intellect is nurtured to come to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. My contention that the modern world is based literally on a split. The Europeans took from us Iqra and they left us Bismi Rabbika. You see, we stopped reading and they started reading, and we kept worshipping Allah but without intellects anymore. At a certain point, and I haven't actually, somebody told me exactly what date it was, but I haven't worked it out myself, but at a certain point it seems like the entire ummah literally switched off their intellects. And it's an amazing phenomenon, because an ummah that was literally addicted to discovery and the pursuit of knowledge suddenly becomes an ummah completely divorced from the pursuit of knowledge, and we're literally left with a blind imitation with very little reflection, except for a few great scholars that have maintained the traditions of Islam. And then the greatest tragedy of that is that when we have begun to start studying and learning, the Muslims have gone to Western methodologies and literally abandoned this incredible tradition that we had. Which is not to say that there's not benefit in much of what of the developments and the knowledges that have taken place in the West. But at the same time, we should recognize that we have an extraordinary and vast tradition. And the abandonment of this tradition is one of the most detrimental things to the condition of the Muslims in our present time. And we have to seriously look at the impact and the effects of this. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us to read, He also told us to ask those who know if you don't know. فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. You have to ask the people of remembrance if you do not know. This is part of the adab of the Muslims. The spirit of Islam is literally to recognize our own limitations and that we must learn from others. Ubay ibn Ka'b, one of the great teachers of the Quran, who was a companion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet came to him and said that he was commanded by Jibreel alayhi salam, by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to read Surah Al-Bayyinah to Ubay ibn Ka'b. And Ubay radiallahu anhu, when he heard that, he said, Ya Rasulullah, As-Sammani bi ismi, did he mention my name? And he said, Sammaka. And Ubay ibn Ka'b wept tears because his name was mentioned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to Jibreel, to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Ibn Abi Jamrah took from this hadith a beautiful meaning, is that he said that the Prophet is teaching his ummah that they should never think that they've gained so much knowledge that they cannot benefit from those that are lower than them or less than them in knowledge. The Arabs have a beautiful proverb, يُوجَدُ فِي النَّهْرِ مَا لَا يُوجَدُ فِي الْبَحْرِ. You can find sometimes in rivers what you don't find in oceans. And there's a beautiful tradition of Muhammad bin Hassan, who asked one of the companions of Ibn Yusuf radiallahu anhum. He had a jariyah who was with Ibn Yusuf, and she said, did you ever hear anything from him? And she mentioned just something she heard him talking about in fiqh. And he was amazed. She didn't understand what it meant, but it actually helped him solve a problem that he had had. And so he said, subhanallah, I learned from that to take knowledge even from the people that don't even understand what they're carrying. We live in a time literally where the Muslims have moved away. I mean, I can go on and on, but I really don't want to. But one of the great tribulations of this age is a lack of knowledge of what Dr. Jamal was talking about in terms of usul, and understanding the richness and the wealth of this deep teaching. Islam cannot simply be reduced to a series of black and white choices of yes or no. It is a deeply complex matrix, generative matrix, from which it can give us guidance in any situation that we have. And this sometimes literally means doing what in normal circumstances would be considered haram. And this is not from the idea of al-ghaya tubarrir al-wasila, that the ends justifies the means. That is not the teaching of Islam. But the teaching of Islam is to recognize that the whole foundation of Islam is based, according to Ibn Abd al-Salam, who they call Sultan al-Ulama, on masalih al-ibad, that the entire sharia was based on the benefits of creation, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has literally given us a deen in order that we might benefit maslaha dunyawiyya wa ukhrawiyya, a benefit in this world and a benefit in the next world. This maslaha is based on two beautiful principles. The first is called dar al-mafasid, and the second is called jalb al-masalih. The ulama call these the dar al-mafasid al-dururat, the necessities. And Islam always will take the necessity over the maslaha. Dar al-mafsada tuqaddam ala jalb al-maslaha in the usul of the Muslims. So to give an example of how we do this, normally it is not permissible for somebody to expose themselves to a physician of their nakedness. But in a situation of darura, it becomes permissible in order to fend off something that would literally harm one of the 6 things what Jamal mentioned, and one of them was the nafs, which is the self. So in this situation it's permissible for the person to expose their nakedness if it is to benefit the protection and preservation of the self. And this is dar'ul mafsada. Jalb al-maslaha, which is for hajat. Those are needs. So the necessities are over the needs. And then the last thing is called tahsiniyat or tatmimat, which are based on tahalli and makarim al-akhlaq. So for instance, fitra, the growing of the beard, is a wajib according to the 4 schools of the people of Sunnah. It is a wajib, but it is from the tahsinat. It's not from dururat, it's not from hajat, it's from tahsinat, and it is a wajib. Nobody can say it's not a wajib. But for somebody, in terms of prioritization, what they call in medical terminology triaging, for people to be obsessed with the beard in an age literally where people are being slaughtered because they say La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, these are people who have their priorities mixed up. Which is not to say that the beard is not important. I'm not in any way diminishing the importance, nor do I believe that the beard is what some people say it's from the qushur al-Islam. There's no qushur in Islam. There's no shells or superficial things in Islam. Islam is a deep teaching. It's a teaching, it's deen al-fitra. And the beard itself is from fitra. But when Muslims make it their life goal to scold other Muslims for not having beards, or make it their life goal to scold Muslims because their pants are over their ka'b, which even that, I mean, there's illah for it. There's a reason for that, which is khuyala. And so part of what the Prophet ﷺ was teaching these early Muslims was to understand the maslaha, the illah in these things. For instance, in this hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said, "Kuntu nahitukum an ziyarat al-qubur, ala fazuruha, fa innaha tudhakkirukum bil akhirah," because it reminds you of the next life. So in the hadith itself, the Prophet is telling us why. He's telling us to do it so that we have bayina, we have a basira, we have a proof, we understand what we're doing. We're not simply doing it out of blind imitation. When you understand the reasons of sharia, and this is something extremely important to understand, what are called ilal. In the Quran, what they call in tafsir tanbihul kitab, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains, كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. That the purpose of siyam is to literally nurture taqwa in the heart of the believer. And so understanding this is why during the fasting it's much stronger to lower the gaze, not to speak about haram things, not to do ghiba. They're haram in all the times, but during the fasting they're even more a priority, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, in order that you might learn these things. The Prophet ﷺ taught his Sahaba these things. One of the things he said about when you're hunting, if the animal goes into the water and it's still alive, and he said, فَلَا تَأْكُلْ مِنْهُ, don't eat from it. فَيُمْكِنُ أَنْ أَعَانُهُ الْمَاءَ عَلَى الْمَوْتِ, because maybe the water caused it to die, and that would be by اختناق. or by suffocation, and it's not permissible to eat meat from which the animal died of suffocation. The Prophet ﷺ told us also, Kulu muskirin haram. Everything that harms the intellect is impermissible. And this is why the Muslims with these modern drugs, except for Abu Dawud al-Zahiri, Ibn Hazm, there's some people trying to revive his madhab for some reason. But Ibn Hazm was a Zahiri, and he felt that khamr specifically meant wine that the Arabs knew, and it didn't apply to other types of things. And people say, I mean, it's using this somewhere in the Gulf states or something where I live, where, you know, you can drink scotch, but you can't drink wine. I mean, subhanAllah. This type of madness. I mean, this is just part of this. That's the spirit, right? And in fact, here they're having a liquor conference. Subhanallah. Fariqun fil Jannah wa fariqun fil Sa'ir. If they ask you, are you in the liquor conference? Say, I'm in the dhikr conference. Subhanallah. They drink to forget. Huh? We pray to remember. It's a big difference. It's a different religion. Subhanallah. Now, unfortunately, Muslims don't do dhikr anymore. They bicker. they do liquor, and Muslim now they bicker, and we're supposed to do dhikr. So we have to get it straight. Really. Start doing some dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the Sharia, if you look at the Sharia itself, there are only 500 verses that deal with ahkam. There are approximately, according to Imam Suyuti, in his Iqlil and Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, there's only approximately 500 hadiths that deal with ahkam. And I want to bring out a really important thing, and I hope people appreciate this. The imams of the early communities were brilliant human beings. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave these people intellects. They were literally containers. Somebody asked me, why is it that we can't contain the knowledge that people had before? And I'll show you why. If you have a cup like this and a cup like this, and you start pouring, at a certain point, it can't hold anymore. You see that? It can't hold anymore. But if you have a big container, it can hold it. Well, if you look at these early Muslims, they were huge containers. And unfortunately, we've become very narrow containers. So literally, you try to pour it in, and unfortunately, in order for you to pour anything in, you have to be emptied in the first place. So when people come and they think they know everything, and you try to pour some knowledge in there, it just spills out, because somebody came up to me and